All
How
right.
have you been, Ace? How have you been, my friend?
I've been very well. Yeah, the channel's been transitioning from the Thomas episodes, and now we're doing some speeches on campus. So it's on a nice trajectory right now.
It's good, man. But will you have? Is it because Thomas started his own channel? Is that so? He kind of cut you out a little bit. No, I'm
No,
kidding.
no, no. I would never. I would never imply, but no, it
uh,
was just kind of the natural course of things, and so I
mm,
think there's going
mhm.
to be all kinds of content from a lot of your mutuals. So
That's good. That's
we'll be
good.
doing some similar stuff.
Yeah, man, that's good. How's the how'd the campus thing start? What year are you in, if you don't mind me asking?
I think a junior. I'm sort of losing track, but yeah.
Yeah, see, in America, so first year, I'm guessing then, or
Well,
second or first.
I was
I
at
don't
like
know.
my third year about because I was at community college,
Oh, yeah.
and so I'm like transferring in. So that's
Yeah, in
the
America they have like how does it go? The very first thing, what is it called? Sophomore?
no,
And
no.
then
It's oh my goodness, freshman.
freshman, then sophomore, then junior, then senior.
That's right.
Okay, I'm Canadian. They go by years, like first year, second year. We call it
Oh,
university like the British, right? We call it university. I mean, we have college, but college is like a vocational thing. Like but yeah, university is like that's what we call it. But yeah, so I made it with my good friend Ace. So we I wanted to bring you on to talk about to have another music critic show outside of Style Talks because I wanted to talk about this concept of called New Age metal, and I wanted to talk to you about a number of albums that we quite enjoy in this genre, but also sort of the what I would say like the weird period in the like mid to I would say early to mid 90s where you had like a bunch of like when metal in general went underground to an extent, and you had a lot of these very creative bands along with sort of like the Florida death scene transitioning into experimentation and sort of innovating things that are basically commonplace nowadays. I mean, especially since the 2010s. Like I was there. Listen, you're young, and I was there during.
sure.
I went to the Summer Slaughter tour with the Gent one. Okay, I
Wow.
went there
Wow.
when it was
All
like,
right.
yeah, it was like Animals as Leaders, Periphery, which I really don't care for, but I care. Animals is a good band. Um, I think the opener was Dillinger. But Rings of Saturn, like I was there. Okay, I was during the Gen thing. That was me. Okay, that was that was us older, well, mid millennials. But but of course, being at the tail end of the new metal thing as well. But before we get into that, just real quick introduction. I'm pretty sure most people listening to this know who you are, but drop the link. What is the ethos of your channel? Besides just being the young boy of Thomas 777, who will be
That's
on the show one day, hopefully, but we'll see. We'll work out a
hopeful.
deal. Work out a deal.
Of course.
Ace charges a fair bit for Thomas's appearance. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. He's got to bring him out of the retirement home in Chicago. He's got, they got to go to Burger King first. And no, I'm kidding. I don't want to insult Tom. I
Of
don't want to
course, of
insult
course.
him. But
No,
Ace does have to give him. He's got to prepare him for a show. He's got to bring him to a Burger King, and it goes from there. So yeah, you have a big
it's very
job.
unconventional process, but yeah, that's how you bridge the Gen X and Zoomers together. You just gotta think outside the
Yeah.
box. But yeah, well, it's funny. My arc is kind of similar to yours. My Loud Sound Epicenter is the YouTube channel. It originally started as a blog when I was a freshman in high school. So
Oh yeah.
it was kind of a long way coming, and I didn't exactly know what it was going to materialize as. But when I was introduced to Thomas through well, I guess I found Thomas on Scott Greer's podcast, highly
Oh wow.
respected. And so it was the metal episode that caught my attention. And so in a way, it kind of wasn't purely political why I was even seeking him out, but eventually it turned into a lot of the political videos, like interview format. And then it just
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Mm-hmm.
kind of just kept going from there. And so I have a Substack that I kind of neglect, but I'll be trying to get back into that.
Yeah,
And
same.
yeah, you
I
know how
really
I go.
neglect it. Yeah,
But
yeah. Oh, it's amazing. Yeah. I mean, yeah, a lot of people have watched your streams with Thomas. So you're really good with the titles. I feel like the one I love is the Thiel Network one. That was a great one where Thomas
oh
goes
right.
into the Thiel Network. Um, I hope Peter Thiel. Listen, I know people that know Peter Thiel, and I want Peter Thiel. Listen, Peter. Give me some money. Take that blonde, chubby girl from your ad from the Right Stuff dating app and give her to me, and we'll be cool. Okay, I will be your largest soldier, Peter Thiel.
Well,
Okay,
I
you
assumed
just
that he was trying to corral you in. That was sort of intentional, that
I,
whole.
I think so. I think he's sending me a message. He's sending you. I'm not a big fan of the blondes, but I don't care. The blonde is good. Don't worry about it. They have fun.
You'll sub it.
I believe in the ad she said she wanted an alpha male. But us Italians were pretty much born. Well, I shouldn't say that we're mama's boys. I can't really say that. But but maybe, who knows? Well, Peter is sending me a message. I think he says like he's trying to say, Gio, I want you on board. I want to give you this trad woman, this chubby trad woman who will bear your Italian stallion children, and that'll be amazing. So, anyways, sorry, my hair is just came out of a shower. Oh, I have to censor that now. God, I have to because of YouTube monetization. But I have to hide the Norwooding. That's why I wear the fez, by the way, to hide the Norwooding. But there you go. That's better. So, so Ace. By the way, what is your haplogroup? I know people have speculated upon your ethnicity, and why Thomas would hang out with such a Mischling as yourself. But I don't know.
Yeah,
Can I say Mischling on YouTube? I hope I can. But
probably. You're probably safe. So I am half Hispanic, or just about, and half Irish, I guess would be the my father's side. So that is, people have speculated. People thought it was Hapa, all kinds of stuff. But it's because I don't know what it is, like Hispanics that look like American Indians. It's a very, I'm not sure the history there, but it tends to be somewhat genetic, I guess.
That's like us Italians can pass for American Indigenous people in a
There you
film
go.
and in pro wrestling. It's true.
There you
Chief
go.
J, yeah, either Arabs or Native Americans. So, like for example, Chief J Strongbow was Sicilian. Mark Capani ended up playing one of the most infamous characters and known to mankind in wrestling, Muhammad Hassan. He was an Italian, by the way. Davari was Persian, so they kind of got almost an Arab.
There you go.
Good job, Vince. That was a great booking, Vince.
That's right.
Let's go down to OVW. Who do we got there? He kind of looks like an Arab. He kind of looks like one of those guys on TV. Like, you can imagine.
Speaking of, Peter Thiel is kind of the Vince McMahon of the dissident right. He is kind of the assembler of these networks. So
yeah, and whenever someone gets viciously canceled in in spaces on Twitter, that is directed by Peter Thiel. He gives us a message to say this person is fired.
That's right. It's the kayfabe. Yeah, the plot lines there. It's all orchestrated. So you're not safe in the Twitter space.
Yeah, that's why a lot of people left for Telegram, because they went into business for themselves. They didn't, as they said about Goldberg, they didn't follow the script.
That's right.
Oh God. But so let's get into this though. How did you I guess an introductory question would be, I was listening to the stream you did with your father, and you talked about that was a pretty nice wholesome Chungus content. I like that.
Thank you.
But I was curious your sort of how you started off being a metalhead. I mean, we all have our journey towards it. I mean, nowadays the way that we could get into the way the metal scene is nowadays, how terrible it is. But it almost makes me. I think it was Adam Jones that said this from Tool. He's like, they call us a metal band. I want to take a shower whenever they say that term metal. But how did you? Were you always sort of like just by virtue of hanging around your father? Were you always like listening to Kino and Nectar tunes?
Well,
So,
it was kind of a long journey because I think he normalized it definitely.
mm,
It was more so coming from like I don't know. I sort of had a weird arc because I guess technically I started with the classic rock and then got into like the new metal, like 3 Days
oh yeah.
Grace and Slipknot. But like a lot of Zoomers, I wasn't listening to the full album, so I was
Uh,
still in that normie mindset of like I like this snippet of this song, and that's why I got the
mm,
album. But eventually, it was through Ozzy Osbourne that I really started to try to create a lineage. It's like, okay, well, if this goes all the way back to 1970, how did this progress throughout the
mm,
decades? And so
mhm.
after I started the blog, that's when I was trying to like make sense of it as like a kind of like an archaeologist would.
Nice, nice. Yeah, and I think that well, I guess the albums and the bands that we're going to talk about today, I think we said obviously Roots by Sepultura, which I think maybe we can do. I think we could do first because Roots gets into a lot of the other genres that we're talking about. Whether we're talking about the later Cavalietta works with Soulfly, I mean, particularly Prophecies, in my opinion, one of their most important albums. But even before that, with Cynic's focus, maybe we could get a little bit into like Pestilence and Atheist and those bands. But let's start off with Roots because I think in terms of genealogy, I was arguing about this with Matthew in Style Talks about how really when you talk about the development of new metal, then later core, really what influenced metal for the next 2 decades up until the 2010s. I would say that, Fear Factory is definitely a name that comes in there. Sepultura is definitely a name. I mean, the fact that half of the guys that formed the sort of new wave of American heavy metal and new metal were featured on Roots practically. I mean, Jonathan Davis, Mike Patton, um,
Fred Durst.
Fred Durst. Yep, Fred Durst. I believe some production thing was going on there with other people that would be influential in the sort of development of new metal and core. And so, but yeah, we get into Focus because Focus is particularly a very special album to my heart. But I think let's start off with Roots and let's set the stage. So Roots comes about in 96, recently acquired Andres Kisar as the main guitarist and sort of the arranger of the band. And of course, we all know the history of Sepultura having a falling out with the Cavalier brothers. I mean, Igor stays on as the drummer much longer up until Dante 13. I believe it was over personal issues like Max married their manager Gloria, so forth. So I had a little bit of an Yoko Ono moment. Um, so, but Roots becomes this hugely influential album because it influences not only the development of metal afterwards, because metal very much was still in sort of life support. I mean, except for Pantera and the bigger ones in the early '90s. I mean, it was abysmal in terms of mainstream popularity, not in terms of creativity, as we will get into, but in terms of mainstream popularity. These like hipsters from Seattle had taken over, and the sort of did you watch the Woodstock '99 documentary, by the way, Ace?
Yes, I did.
Okay, give me your thoughts because this leads into it. Give me your thoughts. Give me your thoughts.
Sure. Well, obviously
It was
there's
a
the
total hit piece, right? It was a total hit
right.
piece.
It's an
Yeah,
obnoxious, politically driven one, so that's too bad.
yeah.
But in a way, that whole event kind of shows you the state of the American psyche and the music industry at that time, just kind of
Oh,
throwing it all
perfect. Yeah.
together.
No,
So
elaborate on that. No, go. Because I have my own thoughts, but you do it. Oh, that's amazing. That's an amazing point. It's true
sure.
because it's true. Yeah,
So
go ahead.
here's the
Yeah.
thing. Here is the take that the this is why you need revisionism in the music industry because they will not tell you.
Oh God!
Moby
Yes,
Moby will not tell you this. He won't do it, but I will. So the thing is,
because he was hiding in his trailer during Woodstock '99 the whole
that's
time.
right.
That's why.
That's right.
Yeah.
Total
Yeah.
shill, total subversive character. But the thing is,
Need an
anyway,
early life check on that one.
we'll,
Yeah.
we'll we'll verify. We'll verify. But the thing is, like Woodstock 99 is Woodstock 69. It's really the
Yes.
same thing. And so I think a lot of people have this romantic view of the original one. Like everybody was in love with this hippie folk rock mixed with all these other rock adjacent genres. And the truth is, like, it really felt forced. It really felt like a CIA op. The fact that Woodstock was supposed to be this like big
Cultural
grandiose
moment.
thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the thing. And so when people look at Woodstock 99 and go, "Oh my gosh, how could this have happened?" Again, it's kind of this Gen X impulse of let's just force this cultural pivotal moment to happen. And I just think it's all wrong. And that's why it kind of all these different demographics, all these different genres that really don't really mesh well on the same festival stage. It just doesn't really work. And so
Yeah.
it's not really surprising to see it kind of looked back on as this, bad thing.
Disaster. Well, and people, I mean, got hurt and they rioted, and it was a huge disaster economically. But no, Woodstock 99, I think, though, in terms of what you said, like the American psyche, I think what really hit the nail on the head was it was the last time that the largely white chud in North America was fully intact before they were devastated by going off to Iraq and Afghanistan, before they were devastated by the financial crisis and then the nascent opioid crisis. It was the last time that culture and like MTV generation would really pay attention to the young white male, in my opinion. And there was this one music critic that, of course, remember, Woodstock 99, according to this documentary, led to Gamergate, remember? And
That's
Gamergate
right.
led to Trump. So Woodstock 99, and they had the picture of Fred Durst shaking Trump's hand. Woodstock 99 led to Trump. Okay, Fred Durst led directly to Trump. The same
That's
energy.
why he has the red hat. The red hat is symbolic.
Yeah, exactly. He was intuiting the red hat. Exactly. The one music critic in it, I believe my good friend Adam Lehrer knows this guy too, but this guy called Adam Lehrer a fascist. Another Pitchfork hack said that, what happened to all those young white males? They went online. Like, it was the last time they could actually go together in public and celebrate their own culture, right? You can't have that anymore. Now we have to go online. Now we have to have anime and griper avies and ratio journalists before we get banned on our 50th account again. True. So, yeah. But what was interesting is that the contrast, I think, between these music critics from Pitchfork, they said that Coachella, which started at the same year in California, that it was like the early 90s was hip and progressive and LGBT friendly. And then the late 90s, these chuds had their metal, their new metal, and the inner city America took hold again. And all of a sudden it became this like crass market exploitation. Because of course, like Coachella is never about crass market exploitation. It was wholesome chungus. They gave water out to people. It was amazing. It was angelic, right? It was Nirvana singing about it was Nirvana at Rock for Choice. There you go. That was
Well, the thing is like grunge ended. It's like people don't remember the fact that it really only had about like a 2 to 4 year run consistently. And then all the things that people attribute to the Seattle legacy is really post-grunge. That might be a little obnoxious to kind of separate the two, but it really was. I mean, it ended because, and I think even Thomas alluded to this in one episode, there was really nothing like national about Seattle itself. There was nothing that really binded the whole nation to like this one specific scene that was probably supposed to stay local anyway. And so when you turn it into
it was actually,
yeah. And so like to make it this, like to make it define a whole decade, it's like, well, it didn't even survive the decade. New metal outlasted grunge. So how does that make any sense?
But that's the thing. And this is what will piss off everybody. Nirvana does not speak to the public consciousness the way that Pantera did and the way that Limp Bizkit. I know this is going to be nuclear take, but Fred Durst is more of an American figure than Kurt Cobain will ever be. Okay, like that's just a fact. That's just a fact.
Isn't that what lefties try to say anyways? Like, yeah, Kid Rock, people like that, these people from the South and these caricatures that they depict, isn't like they even say that those people define like the American identity as opposed to like this like, Kurt was like a progressive sort of, I don't know, just kind of an obnoxious type.
He was proto-redditor.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. These guys are on the margins, so like, how would he be the Ubermensch of America? He doesn't even fit the profile.
Yeah, exactly. I think he fits like a very particular denuded type of American male that really you'd find at like your average like march for like women's march or whatever. But
Right.
like yeah, Limp Bizkit, Fred Durst, and Kid Rock, and like I think new metal tapped into a huge heart of the American psyche, and we can bash it. I know Scott Greer is probably going nuts so if he's listening to this, but
We're gonna bring him. We're gonna bring him over.
we're gonna bring him on. We're gonna talk about new metal, but don't worry, we'll get into other albums that are not as new metal-y. But I think that the sort of the setting up at the very end, the hippies, and of course the way that they dragged DMX was disgusting right after he died too. Yeah, because that act when he sung "My Gamer Word" in front of like the mostly white audience, that was seen for years as an act of racial solidarity. That it was cool that now Black culture can be ascendant in a way that wasn't forced. Unfortunately, I would say the way it is nowadays. Like DMX, I think represented a genuine and organic interest from mostly young white Americans towards Black inner city culture. I feel. I mean, yes, of course, you could say that. Even people within the industry, they would say that, like people who are more woke, right, like KRS-One or whatever, they would say that rap music was basically a psyop in some ways. I mean, gangster rap, but you could say that there was genuine organic expression there, right? I mean, these people actually lived. Well, unless there was some studio gangsters, okay, there was, but a lot of them were, but a lot of them were genuine though, and DMX was definitely genuine. But the way that they besmirched him, and there was this one point where this music critic said, "Well, can you imagine the few African American people there with their white friends, and can you imagine all of them singing 'My Gamer Word' and like this gospel call response, and how would they feel? They felt that their white friend would say the gamer." It's like, no, they were not thinking that when they were there. They were not. They were thinking like, oh my God, DMX is here. I'm here with my friends. Finally, my white suburban middle class friends can appreciate the same music I do. I think that's what they were thinking. I don't know, Ace. Am I crazy for saying this?
No, exactly. That's another example of like revisionism. Like, of course, back then the Overton window was different, and so like I don't know if you remember that statistic. I don't remember if it was verified, but like the idea that more white suburban kids were listening to rap compared to grunge or compared to rap. I mean, and so like obviously it was kind of this like unifying genre, or at least in this context, referring to DMX. So I just don't understand how they could totally like misrepresent it when like that's one of their like go-to lines, as in like this genre is for everybody. It's not exclusive.
Yeah. But it's not for everybody nowadays. That's the thing.
Right.
It's become American culture, but at the same time, we have to feel guilty about it. So it's yeah. I know. Academic Agent recently, he's gone in a spiel about that one particular Julius Evola essay.
Yeah.
We'll leave it at that. But
yeah.
But I think Woodstock '99. I think was sort of like our. If you were an older millennial, I think it was groundbreaking. It was something that was monumental, and it's something that could never happen ever again. I mean, maybe the Live Aid stuff, but not the same vibe. It was if you were old enough to remember, which I mean I wasn't. I was only like 8 years old, but it truly was, I think, a watershed moment for the MTV generation. I mean, listen, we all love our Gen Xers, folks. I mean, we bash them a lot. We all love our Gen Xers, folks. But yeah, so I think so. But what's interesting is that, okay, let's go back to the early '90s then. Let's go back to the picture of the metal scene. You had a lot of creativity and a lot of innovation that was happening underground, the Florida death metal scene. But along, you had these other figures with them. You had Paul Masvidal and Sean Reinert and Cynic. You had Santiago Dobos, who was like affiliated with them. You had other people, of course, of Agora fame. You have other people that were sort of doing these very interesting things. And like, if you could sort of give us a picture, like what was going on during that grunge time with metal? Like, did people truly think like that was it? It was over? Then like Pantera was the only band that was keeping it afloat? or like what was happening? Like what was the nitty gritty? In other words.
Well, I think you can't really tell the story without like the Black Album, because I think that
Yeah.
also gave metal an identity crisis. It seemed like they were giving the okay, you can water it down a bit, you can make it more commercial, but it was still pretty thrashy. And so you have a lot of albums that are like at least thrash to that point that kind of mesh well with the 80s sound. I was just listening to Meshuggah's debut album, which doesn't really sound like anything
Yep.
after it, and you can hear, you know, they're still doing the Metallica sound because it's late 80s, early 90s, which is still the 80s. And so, you know, you kind of have the 80s decade continue onward up until the Black Album, but within the underground scene you have bands like Watchtower that are
Yes.
really combining jazz fusion with a lot of the more aggressive metal subgenres. And so you're getting this like synthesis of bands like Death. You're getting like Chuck Schuldiner was very much influenced the individual thought pattern and Human, though that sound is going to go on to define bands like Cynic, who are also continuing that legacy. And so that's kind of happening in the underground. And so I don't know if we want to say that that's like a major identity, because it's so, you'd have to like be in the know to know about those bands.
Right.
So
Yes. You had to be like around with Cynic, you had to be around university record shops. That's what the big thing was. When they were put on the tour package with Slayer, that was a monumental mistake. That's what made them quit, because you'd have like Slayer fans, they would Cynic was opening up for Slayer. Of course, they didn't have like a tolerance or acceptance. So, you know, they'd be throwing stuff at them. They'd be calling them F Slayers. Like, what is this? This is not metal. Which is kind of crazy, because Slayer and like the big four, they become these holdouts from the 80s that, I mean, I really like when I was a kid, I really loved those Slayer albums that people considered like new metal, like God Hates Us All, you know, like those, like, you know, even a Diablos and Musica, like they're like, oh, Slayer had to change, man. But like, well, I mean, the average Slayer fan, like, you know how it is. They want Rain in Blood over and over again. You know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, they kind of, I mean, all the big four bands technically surrendered to the alternative sound. And so, like you said, they are kind of like carrying over, like they're kind of the old guys from the 80s at that point, even though they've only been around for so many years. It really was time for like a new sound to be given back to the youth, because obviously we can't really rely on the legacy bands to carry it, because of course we just get the same old stuff. So I think that's where the jazz sound starts to come into it.
Yeah, that's a great point. It almost mirrors what was happening with punk after Joy Division, where everything became hardcore. A lot of great stuff came out of that. Like a lot, like Slint, you know, the Jesus Lizard, like the sort of pig F word punk, you know, from the South, right? But the sludgy stuff. But then what happened was there was this huge identity crisis where what happened to like the soft boy, like Fugazi, or here in Canada, they were listening to Propaganda, which is actually a good band. But what happened to them? They started listening to shoegaze, and like this is Chris Ott's thesis, by the way, that this is shoegaze, this is that. But in metal, you have like the reintegration of the brutality. Then, like right off the bat, it only takes like a few years up until Cryptopsy, where you have Lord Worm, you have inaudible growling. But then you also have this other innovative stuff underneath that's happening in Florida largely. And also pockets in Europe, like, you know, Disembowelment's one example. But so, you know, you have this innovation, but they're also, like you were saying, this identity crisis, which is very fascinating. But even like, would you say Megadeth was the last of the big four to sell? Because they did have Euthanasia. They did have other albums in the mid 90s. I mean, Marty Friedman was still there, but well, I mean, maybe that was a bad thing by the time it came to Risk. But would you say that, like, where was, because people talk about Metallica selling out, they talk about how Slayer sort of went underground, but like, what was Megadeth doing at this time? Where they were still on MTV frequently. It was just that they didn't have like the stadium power, I guess they did.
Sure. I think they were still being mostly consistent. To me, the one album that kind of exposes them, besides Risk, is the one everyone looks at. But I mean, The World Needs a Hero. I think that
Yes,
that may have like some of their worst songs, but it's kind of ironic because like that title is talking about the fact that metal is in this stage, and like, you know, what is going to be the galvanizer for moving forward, because all the legacy bands are towing a line pretty much. And so he's kind of just posing that question out there, even on the album where, you know, he's even suffering from some of it. So it is interesting.
Wow,
I do think they were the last. They were one of the last to hold out.
Yeah.
And then they came back almost immediately, though. That's the thing. They did with like the system has failed. You know, it wasn't like it was an era, really. I mean, maybe briefly. So
yeah, it was. What was the album after Risk when Marty Friedman left? It was.
I think that was System has failed.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. Then jump way forward into the 2010s. They released my favorite album, Endgame, the Alex Jones album. So,
literally an Alex Jones and the interview. Have you seen that interview?
Yeah, man, multiple times when it used to be on YouTube. Yeah, man. I woke up in a black FEMA box. Darkness was all around me in my coffin. That was I could like Dave Mustaine. Hats off to being one of the wokest man in metal. The man who has inspired a million Metal Sucks hit pieces. You know?
That's right. No, that's true. Like even with this newest album, people are saying, I'm so glad he got away from his xenophobic roots in Dystopia, because in Dystopia he is talking. I mean, you can interpret the lyrics as talking about like immigration and America's identity, and so it's such a political album, and it's funny that people don't really listen to it that way. It's just it's like Super Collider. It's just another album, but I mean very explicit lyrics.
Yeah, and I think maybe if the right audience finds it eventually, then it'll propel into cult-like status. Like
it could.
Yeah, the same way that I would think even Euthanasia is, the fact that it was sort of neglected by the charts, and then it became this like big thing, right?
Right.
So let's get into it, I guess. We'll cover Focus eventually, but Sepultura's roots. I mean, having half my family in Brazil, Sepultura, I think, like, is the national band in Brazil in a lot of ways, at least in terms of rock and metal. And so Roots really is the culmination of all of their influences. They actually go and they seek out world musicians, very famous, popular musician in Brazil that did a lot of their arrangements. I've been reading reviews of Roots, actually. So they sought out, they did the music video, and they actually had interviews, and they did, I think, some field recordings with a certain tribe in Brazil. Let me see, Brazilian folk music, thrash metal. Yeah, Colinos Brown, who did a lot of the arrangements, very, very popular traditional musician in Brazil. The Zavantes tribe is the one that did a lot of their chants, like, for example, in Ratamaharas, and a lot of like the preludes throughout the different arrangements. And they bring in a lot of world musicians from Brazil. And of course, the famous Attitude music video where they had the Gracie family there. That was amazing, man. So you have to realize, to give you some context, they were sort of, Max Cavalera is kind of similar to my mother, actually, in that his father was the Italian ambassador to Brazil, and he is ethnically Italian, growing up in Minas Gerais. And it was right after the coup that led to the military juntas in Brazil. And he talks about when they were kids, and it was very hard to get music instruments, and there was a lot of censorship and so forth. And so Roots, so having that same experience, like, I am also ethnically Italian, but my mother's side are mostly expats to Brazil. And so Roots becomes this sort of culmination of these different influences, not just in terms of the global South, in terms of expanding the horizons of people's sort of auditory palette into world music when it comes to metal, because bands had done this before, Sepultura, but also when it comes domestically to bringing these new metal musicians who are just getting off the ground at this point into this, at that time, Sepultura was still this, like, considered this hugely authentic thrash band, and, doing a lot of work at Morrisound, famously almost going poor to move to Florida, to like live in Florida at the time to work with Scott Burns. And so you have this, like, really, I think, to me, especially here in Canada, we had, bands like Tea Party. it really was, I think you could say, the only sort of that little time period in the 1990s where multiculturalism was sort of like a positive thing. It sort of gave us some sort of like peace of mind. Well, unless you lived in Eastern Europe, then it was a very bad thing. Unless you lived in Africa, then it was a very bad thing. But, in terms of like North America and the West in general, it seems that like this was the only time that like, post Cold War, liberalism had won, and now we can enjoy other people's cultures until we realize the problem with that. But like for the time being in the 1990s, it was very much like the new agey thing was upon us once more, the way it was in the 70s. And it was an exciting time. And if you listen to Roots, I mean, it's very, very close album to my heart. But even just the fact that they were willing to take those risks, being like this hugely authentic thrash band. So what was your impression? When was the first time that you listened to Roots? Like, what was your experience of it?
Yeah, that might have been back in the heyday of YouTube. I think that was like the background music for like some animation, some stick figure fight or something along those
Yeah,
lines.
just stick death. Yeah.
Newgrounds.com or something, because that was kind of like it was kind of like how Bam Margera kind of introduced me to all this like skater music. And so that was part of the diet, is this very, aggressive Brazilian band. But, at that time, and maybe this speaks to how some older people don't get it, but like when I was a child, that all kind of bled together. All of the new metal to me was the natural progression of heavy metal. And so to hear a song like the Rada Matata, it just didn't seem like that was a big jump. To me, it was kind of like an interesting thing that it was part of the album. But like, what is that one song? What's like the crossover song on that album? Isn't it Undercut? Is that
Undercut? Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a 2-minute song, and so it's like, oh, okay, here's this is still Sepultura. It's still doing the same thing, but it's kind of like the Black Album, how you can kind of see the weak spots. It's already introducing this new like subgenre within the genre. So I didn't really see it for what it was at the time, but looking back, they did kind of slowly but surely expose what the industry was going to turn into with that album.
Yeah, Born Stubborn is another one. I know what's really interesting is that as an album, this is where people weren't aware, I think, of the music palette of the Global South. For example, their one acoustic song on it became hugely popular in Eastern Europe. Jasko was a very one. And of course, in Brazil, it becomes very popular. And a lot of covers, you can find like Polish language covers of Jasko. And so I think that what was interesting is that now that metal had this awareness of world music, then the sort of auditory landscape transitioned, I wouldn't say fully into a sort of, what would you say, post-Western vibe, but it certainly becomes something of that nature. It becomes something of like, no longer is like metal, like, music for white kids anymore. Like it kind of was, but it kind of wasn't. Now it's like metal becomes this global thing, now, but this one, it still had like a sort of like a masculine and a solar vibe. It wasn't like the total like Redditification of metal that we see nowadays, where it's like this, you can just picture the Soy Jack meme of like, the guy where he's pointing to his t-shirt. It's like, I heart metal. Like someone on Buru Soy has to make that. I'm pretty sure I've seen that. I love metal. Like, man.
Well, like you said, because it's no longer local, it's like the Florida death metal scene. I think it was important that was local, and then we can sort of let the European guys get a take on it. But yeah, once it becomes this like cosmopolitan thing, then you start to lose like, how exactly do you get these specific sounds, and how do you get the specific thing? Because nowadays everything seems to be made in a studio, and it's all very synthetic, and so it's kind of unfortunate that, I mean, an album like Roots, as much as people could like it, it really did usher in, it normalized what sort of the downfall of the industry, because it kind of it lowered the barrier of entry seemed to be lowered in a ways, since it was brought into like everybody's living room, like the internet, so to speak.
Yeah, and this was also, I think, the transitionary period. Like I know that I mentioned this in our Style Talks review of Obsolete, where Burton C. Bell has this interview where he says that, Fear Factory was one of the few bands that could make a living still but was just on the cusp of the internet age and like Napster and like peer-to-peer sharing. Yeah, which is, I mean, it's ancient nowadays by the standards of what we're living in 2022. But at the time, this was revolutionary. I mean, the fact that Fear Factory intuited a lot of that, the way I think that Sepultura, and also another way, intuited the way the culture. So for people listening this far into the talk, the reason I think that we have such a fascination in metal, and I think that, you bring this up with Thomas as well, is that it really as an art form, it really does sort of like track on a sonic level the trajectory of society in a lot of different ways. And
right.
yeah, in the 90s especially, I think like if you look at those two bands, Fear Factory and Sepultura, they were like culturally Sepultura and sort of like, I guess you could say, digital techno overlay of society. I mean, those two bands were sort of like light years ahead of saying, okay, this is where culture and this is where our civilization is going. And what's funny, I mean, me and Matthew talked about this, is that at the very end, it wasn't like your typical, like jump cut to the Black Mirror ending, like technology bad in obsolete. Burton C. Bell, the whole character, Edge Crusher in this sort of song story booklet, he realizes the futility of being like sort of bane to the system. And it's sort of like a weird, it's not like a total like technology bad, Black Mirror, oh wow, technology is displacing us. It's more of like the futility of fighting against that. Even though it has a lot of like your sort of like what would you say, chud sci-fi, like,
Yeah.
fighting the techno beast or whatever.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. Epic boss battle, yeah.
yeah,
No.
yeah. There's, in fact, one song is about an epic boss battle,
Oh,
actually.
really? Yo, let's go.
Yeah. Yeah, between Edge Crusher and this like system police thing called the Smasher Devourer. So yeah, it's very, yeah, because Burton C. Bell was being influenced by like shonens and by like other RoboCop, like that.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. But so yeah, so the Roots album though, it is fascinating in that it sort of gives you a sort of timepiece. But why do you think it became so influential? Is it just because it gave a leg up to these new metal bands, or do you think that the sound, like, how would you describe the transition from, say, Chaos AD to Roots, like the earlier stuff, to like Sepultura now, and the fact that it is probably the last album with both the Cavalletta brothers as well? So yeah.
Sure. Well, I just think Chaos is just a little more in line. Like I can understand someone buying that who was familiar with the earlier stuff. I can see them just thinking this is kind of like how Endgame and Dystopia and Megadeth's catalog latter half, this could be about anything. It's the same sound. We're just trying to create different riffs, but it's the same formula. With Roots, I think that's one of the first major examples of a band. I think it also has to do with like the connections. I mean, the fact that all of those, like you said, all those people that would go on to define the new metal scene, I think that there was just too much buzz around that specific album with those people involved for it to go nowhere.
Mm-hmm,
But it was
mm-hmm.
also just, I mean, that really was an album that, I mean, it's like Load for Metallica. It's just so, the identity is so warped. And so you
Mm-hmm,
have to
mm-hmm.
confront it at that point. In Chaos, you can say, hey, it's slightly different, but everything's still moving. But with Roots, I just feel like it's unavoidable, the amount of difference.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. It really is. I mean, people call it the new metal album for a reason. I would say that, I mean, the sort of the later stuff with Derek Green. I mean, I'm quite a big fan of Dante 13. Even the very first one they did, Nation. I mean, Nation was a very powerful album, but it retained the new metal thing, but it was sort of doing something different. It was much more aligned with the sort of music sensibilities of metal fans you would find in Brazil, in the global South. It very much had sort of rhythmic quality to it that I think in North America we did sort of not gone beyond, but we sort of have a different, like, we don't have, it seems that like protest music died in the 1990s with like Rage Against the Machines until nowadays. I mean, nowadays you have a lot of Soy Jackington type of stuff that is about protest. I mean, I know that, here, I know, listen, as a Canadian, as someone from Southern Ontario, I'm going to get massive heat for this, but I cannot stand Protest the Hero. I never liked them growing up. I know they had the Trump album recently. I heard this. They had the anti-Trump album. Yeah. Of
Oh,
course,
man.
of course. They're a bunch of libs from fucking Burlington. So oh man, oh no, all my Canadian bros, no. But yeah. So do you think that is it just that in North America we have a different sensibility towards like protest music? I mean, I know it sort of came back in the Trump era and like Rage Against the Machine's touring again, and but what happened to protest music? Did it die in the early '90s or was it like still there? Yeah.
I think honestly, maybe this is just speculation. I think like the American psyche was like in submission to the Patriot Act, and so I don't think for that long stretch during the Iraq and Afghanistan war, I mean, I think people were supporting it, not because they had to be. I mean, yeah, they were psyoped into it, but like they believed it. They believed that it was a just cause, and so it's one of those things where like, does every individual band have to be blue pilled on it? Well, they don't have to because they naturally, that's just the education they were brought up with. And so I think about that famous Britney Spears Tucker interview on CNN where she supports, we should support President Bush because he's our president.
Oh my God.
Which is kind of based, it's
kind of relatively. I mean, Bush is not based nowadays, but like back in the day, it was the equivalent to being based. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it would be like if Britney Spears. Wait, actually, did Britney Spears support Trump? Did he?
I think it's ambiguous. I know. I think Paris Hilton voted for Trump, but I'm not sure. We need the '90s. We need the '90s Hollywood trash TV. We need to get to the bottom of this.
We need to get exactly. We need the Paris Hilton documentary by Amanda Millis done right now.
That's right. Yeah. By what is it, Alex Lee Moyer? We need.
We need exactly. Yeah. And then like basically Paris Hilton would try to do what Tequila did, but do it right. She won't.
There you go.
Won't be like a total wignap, but like she'll do it right. She'll do like the Dissident Right Circle. She'll get published in like she'll be a bit more edgier than the Barry Weiss Containment Zone. So maybe she'll publish it on her, but no, she'll publish in the American Mind. Paris Hilton. Yeah. Well, we need to make this happen. And Alex Lee Moyer will do the documentary. It'll be amazing. But well, I think like protest music and metal came back, I would say, after the huge troop buildup. I mean, certainly you had System of a Down. That was like it's funny. I got a lot of traction out of those Serge Tankian memes where it's like, because where I took the song Theta Waves, but he was talking about like slonking raw eggs and like carrots. Like he's like, but so, like it did come back, I would feel like, especially System of a Down, like I guess because of another band deeply influenced by folk music and world music because of their history. And I mean, Serge, as an Armenian growing up in Lebanon, they sort of even like I remember the one interview with Rick Rubin saying like I knew what they were doing because of course Rick Rubin, growing up as a member of the tribe, he knew what that type of Eastern folk music was like, and he said that you could tell what they were doing with like rhythmically, and the fact that in the first few albums Serge himself had such an acrobatic vocal ability, in songs like Streamline or even Theta Waves, songs like No, like even like the more popular ones like Aerials, like yeah. I mean, I didn't think I was going to bring up System of a Down, but like, are you a System of a Down pilled, or what is your opinions, Ace? Like, what is your general?
I honestly, I kind of put them in the same category as Rage Against the Machine. I don't know if that's being a little too harsh, but I think musically, System of a Down is definitely probably the thinking man's Rage Against the Machine, the thinking man's new metal. And so I always liked Aerials, and I never totally wrote them off. But they're probably going in the same lineage, probably going back to like Bob Dylan, how in American hippie culture, protest music and folk rock seem to go hand in hand with a lot of the counterculture space. And so it does kind of line up with what would be the social justice cause in the 21st century. It would be, the Armenia stuff and the anti-war anthems.
Yeah.
Would definitely sync up.
And hopefully, it's funny. I wonder if Serg, because of what's happening in Armenia, I wonder if he'll come out in support of this. Well, it's no longer known as a special military operation, but he'll start posting Z's and he'll start talking about based face Poot, and like, because they have to support Armenia. So maybe we'll get a new. He'll start anti-Turk posting on Twitter. Maybe that'll happen. So maybe the whole we'll get a new System of a Down album out of this. And
That's true.
listen, I don't mean to belittle what's happening, because I think what's generally happening is a tragedy, though. The fact that the West is cynically exploiting the situation in Armenia to open up a caucus front. But like, okay, well, current politics aside, let's bracket that for. But I know it's so terrible. Even just thinking of like, oh man, this is terrible. How can we get a new System album out of it? Like, it's terrible. But yeah, System of a Down, I think, sort of brings that tradition back to life that had been in the American psyche. But I think that, I mean, System was such a huge band in terms of metal. It was such a huge band at that time. And I remember it. I was a kid then, but like, I was an older kid. And I remember when BYOB was everywhere, and like normies, like my cousin's, like, my friend's older cousin was into it. Like, it's like, whoa, like it's incredible. But I think that, protest music was given new life the sort of later declining years of Bush. And of course that all went away under Obama. That all went away.
Yeah.
Now that was something, obviously. But so final thoughts on Roots, though. Like, do you think that as we go on, as we explore these other albums, you're saying that, I think you have more of a negative take on it. So you're saying that it was sort of the decline of metal as being the specifically, I know this is going to sound totally LARPy, this like European Faustian spirit thing, that it was for us. Like, you're saying that it became part of like the Wholesome Chungus, We Are the World, Toto Africa sort of deal. Like,
it is the start of that, but also the way to avoid that from happening in like an alternative universe is don't make that the defining album. Don't make grunge the defining genre. That stuff, those albums are supposed to exist in some capacity, but it's supposed to be local. But when you make it, the face of the whole genre, then you're telling all these other bands, Metallica, you gotta, dude, they're stealing your gig. You gotta show them what you can do. And then all the other bands are like, oh, okay, so this is what metal is now. So we don't have to, do the crossover thing. We don't have to do thrash. Let's just listen to, let's listen to African music from places I can't pronounce, and that'll be the and that's metal.
Yeah. We have to unplug now.
That's right.
Yeah, that's what D. Snyder said. It's too bad D. Snyder's gone psycho, though. Like,
I know, man. Dude,
yeah, it's terrible.
It's so tragic. The W bands. Yeah, no, he was well read. He was well read on what was happening, but
yeah. That interview was great. Like, the sort of decline of metal. Like, Ronnie James Dio. Like, it was right before he died too. It's like, like, that's not metal. Like, that's not the stuff I grew up with. Like, that's. It's like, you had to have that single, and the fact that like MTV, like the D. Snyder, what did he say? He's like, MTV hurt, but MTV helped, but then it hurt. Like, it's like, it had the burnout cycle, and maybe we could talk about how metal is different nowadays. Like, right. I mean, I don't follow the current news. I mean, I'm sort of disheartened by it. I mean, the metal journalists really destroyed everything, but right. We'll get into that. So. Let's go to the early 90s, though. An album that's super, super close to me in my heart. Cynic's Focus. Let's lay the groundwork. So this comes out of them touring, Sean Reinert as the drummer and Paul Masvidal, the sort of main guitarist and lyricist and visionary of Cynic. Unfortunately, Sean Reinert has passed away recently, so RIP. But they were touring with Death for Human. Chuck Schuldiner wanted to keep them on, but then they wanted to do their own thing. And of course, Chuck Schuldiner then came out with the legendary sort of lineup of Gene Hoglan and Steve DiGiorgio, who was on Human. But then, of course, Hoglan came about, and I forget the guitarist's name. Oh, what was his name? Shannon. Yeah, he was a good one, though. He was good. So a little known story is that they were set to record at Morrisound because they were touring in Europe, but they actually got stuck in Europe for a few months because Hurricane Irene had devastated Florida and like totally flooded Morrisound. and like their equipment got destroyed. And so they said that that was actually a blessing in disguise because it got them to reformulate what they were doing from the demos in Europe. And so then later on, they went to Mora Sound and, laid down, I would think, one of the most iconic sessions in sort of that era. But uh, what was your thoughts initially on Focus? And then maybe we could go through a little bit of the lyrical content, because I do think that it's important. Yeah.
Sure. Well, sound wise, I think it was the natural progression from the band I mentioned earlier, Watchtower. It's just really embracing sort of unconventional genres you wouldn't think would mesh with metal. But then again, like Megadeth was doing jazzy stuff in their early period.
Chromatic scales. Yeah.
Right. And so I think kind of bringing that stuff to the forefront, kind of normalizing it in the way that Sepultura was trying to normalize, their local culture. We should have embraced, of course, academic agent would disagree, but we Americans should embrace the jazz element in heavy metal, because it is Americana. It's not that Italian Sinatra nonsense.
Oh no! I'm stopping the recording right now. I'm stopping. You were banned from Content Marketing. No,
because that's
I understand. Like, as much as I love Sinatra, as much it's very close to my one aunt's heart. I understand that Sinatra is an Ellis Islander, an infiltrator into the American sonic psyche. I understand the sonic unconscious of America. So I will agree with you, even though I'm a big Sinatra fan. But for people who don't know, what is your general critique of Sinatra? You were going onto this on the stream, but you say that Sinatra is a foreigner. He's an Ellis Islander. It's an alien music genre to America. Defend yourself, right? Really quick.
Of course. No, this is, you're not going to hear this anywhere because it's been blacklisted. Okay. He who shall not be named has to be named on the Content Minded Corner, because the thing is, Sinatra represents a certain like version of jazz that can't go anywhere. It can't exist outside of the 20th century. And so when you make that, when you try to describe the Rat Pack in these like religious terms, it keeps metal in it keeps music in a very specific category where it can't grow naturally. And so that's kind of like this boomer impulse of like, that's why metal is where it is today in classic rock. It's like, we only want to pay tribute to these people that, got to this level of fame. And that's not what music is supposed to be. It's supposed to be for the youth. And so to kind of this kind of idolatry with Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra, it just kind of keeps metal and jazz and all the stuff that the boomers like, it makes it so young people can't touch it. And so that's why people like Elvis and Jerry Lee Lewis had to bust open the doors and, kind of synthesize all this music and combine it with blues and gospel and all this other stuff, because that's how music grows. That's why jazz has to be part of Cynic and so on.
Yeah, but that's evil and racist what Elvis did, though. That's the problem. It's terribly according to the new biopic. It's evil and racist, and according to people with pronouns in the bio on Twitter, that one thread that had 100,000 likes about Elvis. So
you gotta send me that. You gotta send me that. I missed it.
I remember it, but it was essentially that Elvis stole black music in America, and that it was terrible, and that he didn't credit anybody, and that it was like basically like white trash music for the day. It was like really just it was right after the movie came out. Really disgusting. Like, my mother's a big fan. I've never listened to Elvis a lot, but I mean, I can appreciate a great, my mother's a big fan. But when it comes to Sinatra, I think that you hit the nail on the head, because he's coming out of a very specific tradition that in some ways is foreign to America. And also the fact that he is like received in the template of like boomer iconography that you can't really, when you listen to Sinatra, it's the 20th century. There could never be a LARPer that is like in our era of Sinatra. You can only have the greatest hits. But what do you think that is? Is just the structure of the music? Is just that the boomers made the Rat Pack into like this huge cultural force, going on, the Dick Cavett show every night. And, it's like, what is it? Why is it that the Zoomer Radio thing, why can't you grow from that? Like, as opposed to Elvis and these other genres?
Why can't you grow from Sinatra?
Yeah.
Because the thing with that big band format is, like, I think Sinatra became famous because back in that early 20th century fame period, you kind of had to be eclectic, and you had to be an actor and a musician and kind of this casual on talk shows. And so the problem with, from a Zoomer's point of view, is all of that music was really just one category. It was just jazz, or it was just big band. And the thing about Elvis that I think is very, it's universal, is the fact that you have to combine at least two genres together. That might be technically classical music doesn't really do that, or maybe it does, but you have to combine more than one genre, because I think, I think this might be try hard. Music is Hegelian. And so you have to have a synthesis in music. Otherwise it dies. And that's what you see with, metalcore bands, where they take, the caricature of metal and punk, and that's all you need. But you got to have more than that. There's got to be an authentic, like, investigation into what those genres are. And so I just feel like Sinatra, he just did the one thing. You're supposed to do more. You're supposed to build on top of the bedrock.
Right. So I would say visual art is the same way. I mean, that's why the academic painters couldn't really go anywhere in the sort of late 19th century. That's why Impressionism basically bodied them. I mean, they could only go to the sort of skill and the format of a very, very narrow band of the classicists, of the old masters, that in essence they really didn't even totally get anyways. And so the sort of academic painting of Bouguereau and others, they didn't even capture the spirit of the old masters the way that I think some later people claim to, like, the Vienna Secession. But I was talking about this with Patrick Casey. But yes, I agree with you. As much as I love Sinatra, I think that, well, what happened to core, though, like, as a divergent thing? I mean, we'll get to focus, but what happened to core? Why is core dead? Why is metalcore dead? Why did they all go to the sort of red state county fair circuit? What happened there? Listen, I love the 2016 album of Mice and Men just because it's the new metal album. But I know. But what happened to them? What happened? Why couldn't core grow? In other words,
this might be controversial. I know some people, like, in the core like concert audience, might disagree. It might be an upgrade for them personally, but when you made it commercial, you brought in the women into this predominantly male space, and that may have worked a little bit in the emo scene because it was always kind of feminine. Core is supposed to be a boys' club, and when you commercialize it and you make it so, like, your cousin was listening to a System of a Down song, it's very charming, but it's also a sign that we're really lowering the barrier of entry. And so that's where the music starts to get sacrificed a little bit. And I think it starts to lose, like, what metal really is. And so that's where the identity, again, gets warped with the core audience.
I remember one time I was in first year. This was, I think, 2011. And in a big lecture hall, I think it was a history class, I looked over, and next to me is this white girl with, like, the bangs. And I remember she had halitosis. I remember I could smell this. I'm like, oh, God. And then I look over her laptop, and her screensaver is a Bring Me the Horizon, like, concert thing with the logo. And I'm like, wow, oh no. No, it's over, Metal Bros. It's over. It's over. No, but I agree. I mean, I know it's not to bash women. It's just that I think when core appealed to the sort of post-emo crowd, to, like, younger millennials, I mean, there was a huge development of that sound. There was bands like Sepultura. There was bands like, Converge. Like, there was a sophisticated sort of earlier core that went into it, Midwestern emo. But then by the time it hit, like, Bring Me the Horizon, Blood on the Dance Floor, I guess of Mice and Men. I don't want to bash them because I like them, but, like, of Mice and Men, give me some. Ask Alexandria. Yeah.
Atreyu.
Yeah, Atreyu. Talking about environmentalism like that.
We want Atreyu talking about bleeding mascara, violence. Okay, violence and romance clashing. That is real.
Bleeding mascara. That is such a symbol of the post emo core, like the bleeding mascara. Oh my god! See, yeah, see, you get it. Even as Zoomer, you get it. You look to your siblings, us older millennials, core millennials. You're like, what are you people doing? What are you doing? You know, now you have 40-year-olds touring like My Chemical Romance nostalgia tours. What is this? What? Listen, if I don't mind the Limp Bizkit nostalgia tours because Fred Durst still has it. You know, he's graced into his old man status, his creepy old man status. He's graced into it. But you know, singing the Black Parade when you're 40 years old is kind of like not good.
Exactly.
And of course, what the secret was with Core is that a lot of these teenage girls hanging around with these guys wearing mascara, a lot of bad things happen behind the scenes in those concerts. Okay, not to get into it, but we all know about the Daru. What's the guy's name? Dara Van. You know the guy from what band was that? Asking Alexandria. What band was that?
Oh, it might have been.
No, it wasn't Asking Alexandria. It was oh god, you know, but you know what I'm talking about, the one that Jesse Slaughter was involved in.
Okay.
Yeah. When she was like 15 years old. So a lot of bad things was happening back then. And then of course you have the later ones where it, you know, like Chelsea Grin, and like it sort of became a competition to see like how, I guess what would you call it, like very stripped down brutality, where it's like all about the blast beats and all about the breakdowns.
Exactly.
And yeah. You know, those bands, right? Like I had a lot of friends who were into this because in my area in Southern Ontario, like core was everywhere. It was like the thing. Like if you were a metalhead, you had to go to Hamilton, you had to go to Toronto, like not around here. Like in Niagara, it was all core bands. It was all like hipster core. Oh, it was terrible, man. It was, yeah, because I had friends that had bands, and you know, it was, oh man, you go to yeah, but without doxing myself, we had this thing around here called Scene Fest, and one time it was pretty cool because one year a lot of these American bands that were touring with Sumerian came down. So I saw the Faceless, I saw a few of those other bands. I think Rings of Saturn came down. Yeah. I actually met Michael Keane twice, Keane Machine, and he recognized me. I'll tell you the story. I go up to him, and it was right after their concert, and it was in this local festival. And I go up to him like, "Oh my god, Michael Keane, I'm a big fan." First thing comes out of my mouth after I'm a big fan is I'm also a big fan of David Icke, and I love David Icke. I've read Children of the Matrix, and he sort of looks at me like this fat kid. He like shakes my hand. Oh, you're a weirdo. And then when I went to Summer Slaughter and he was on stage prepping his rig, because you know you got to get the right plugins with the Fractal Axe effects, folks. Got to get the right plugins. So I was right in the front row. I met the singer from Decrepit Birth. He was an amazing guy, Robinson. He's a great guy. But then I shouted, I'm like, Keane, Michael Keane, remember me? Remember me? He's like, he looks over and he's like, oh God, not you again. Like he actually said that. That was amazing. It was amazing.
Yo, let's go.
And yeah, it was dope. Yeah. He's not doing so good nowadays. He's got some personal demons. But anyways. Yeah. So anyway, Cynic's Focus. We're finally getting to Focus. So Focus was like the album that brought in, I think, a lot of like music wise, the jazz fusion thing. A lot of like the sort of 70s stuff was a huge inspiration, whether it was Alan Holdsworth, Mahavishnu Orchestra, the Psychopton guitars, no guitar note was played the same in unison. It was very, very much the sort of point and counterpoint. But lyrically, though, you have a lot of these bands embracing like new age woo. And I thought that, you know, using a vocoder to get like an alien sound mixed with growling, like, but the lyrics though, the sort of like the world music, the jazz breakdowns, like to me when I was younger, when I was a new ager, it was like, oh my God, like it was, I'm cooming. But what's your impressions of Focus when you listen to it? Like, what's your impressions?
Well, it might be one of those songs towards the end, might be the last one, where it literally sounds like the Metal Slug 3 soundtrack. It's got a very
Mm.
specific, like 8-bit video game heavy metal riff. And so to me, like I've gotten used, I've assimilated into like the Watchtower sound and a lot of the jazz fusion. So to me, it's not that
Yeah.
foreign. It's not like combining, it's not like a Banana Ice Cream or whatever. It's not this big contrast. But no, I like the album. I was a little weirded out by the vocals though, because I wondered if
Yeah.
that was too much. I wondered if that was crossing over into we're trying a little too hard to make this a different thing. But no,
Yeah.
that album was kind of eye opening.
Yeah. I think because Paul Masvidal said he wasn't confident in his vocal ability at the time, so he had
Okay.
to like find a way to mask it. But it became like this thing. Like it became, he said like he had this like very complicated rig between the vocoder and like his actual like sound using a Strandberg guitar, and he said like he's like it was him and his music guy. They were touring these like basically like there's this one famous one from Berkeley that got recorded, but they were touring these college towns, and he's like, some nights it would work and some nights it wouldn't, and it's like we didn't know it was so complicated that it's like, we just pray to God that it worked. But in terms of the lyrics though, like what really gets me is that let's read well, Veil of Maya, the opening song, the one that everyone knows. In Maya's grips, illusion transforms virility, perceiving through a delusive world of duality. Veil of Maya, balance every joy with a grief. Dual scales of Maya, Earth's unending of polarity. Aham Kata, Veil of Maya. And so, those who don't know, Veil of Maya is the sort of, well, it's hard to explain because it's not necessarily illusion, but rather it is the veil of perceptibility in Vedanta. It is, you could say it's illusion, but rather it's not so much that it's illusion, like it's an unreality. It's a reality, but it's sort of like, it's like mutual origination in Buddhism. It's like everything is impermanent in a sense. And ahamkara is the lowest, sorry, excuse me, it's the lowest material self. It is the sort of self that is, I guess you would equate it with the ego. It's been many years since I studied Vedanta in grad school, but it was like, even though it was like kitschy and new agey, it was like, a new age shop in Venice Beach. To me, it's very meaningful because metal had never crossed into this territory before, into like bringing in like spirituality and talking about these things. Like even one of my favorite lyrics is from let's see, I'm but a wave to Siri Cosmic Sea. All is within you, as in a dream. I'm but a wave to infinity within thy consciousness, an ever expanding sphere. Immortality speaks ignite, spreading by air of bliss. Like that's like that. Like compare that to let's see, F worded with a knife by Cannibal Corpse. Like,
Right. There's definitely a big disproportionate rate in death metal. And maybe that's why death metal doesn't really grow after the Florida scene, is because people don't appreciate, death metal was good when it was combined with other genres. That's something to think about. So.
That is something to think about. But what do you think? Why do you think that you had bands like them, Agora came after, Pestilence with Spheres, Atheist with Consuming Impulse, to an extent, Death a little bit. I mean, the lyrics being more introspective rather than being like overtly political or religious. Why do you think at this time in the early 90s, metal took on the sort of grander new age vision? Like, was it just because of like the sort of new awareness of globalization? Or was it that you had like these, like Paul Masvidal being this like, hippie LGBT person that is like, like what do you think? Like, why did all these bands sort of like become more of this in the 90s?
Well, I think American identity is at that time is kind of yearning for something more, and sort of kind of, I think a lot of the metal bands at that time are really trying to confront that in a lot of these globalization type topics. And so I don't know if they're politically inclined to talk about it from that space, but I think when you see people, diving into jazz or diving into, things that aren't conventionally metal, I just think they see that as the only way for this thing to grow. Otherwise, you know, I think they're looking at the big four and saying they did it. They did the thing.
Yeah.
They're the legacy. And so what do we do now? It's sort of the ball's in their court. And I think that they're not shy to look into more obscure, you know, places to find some of that identity. And I think once like Cynic came out with that album and it became kind of like this okay thing that was validated, I think that's when all the other bands start to fall in line. So I don't know if they're all in tune, but I think definitely just, you know, after the in the 90s when they needed an identity, you know, referendum, I just think it was because they were yearning for just something a little bit more during that climate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But do you think that the sort of traditional topics of death metal, be it like, you know, horror movies, you know, mass murders, like things of that nature, political persecution, you know, some of those bands were overtly political in some respects. I know that a lot of them got that from punk, but I mean, of course, Slayer had one of the basest songs known to man, Angel of Death. But do you think that those topics were sort of played out and like taken as not serious at this age? Or
Yes, exactly. I forget. I don't know if it was someone from Slayer or Exodus, or it may not have even been either. But I remember somebody said, like, if you're after the 80s, if you're a metal band and you're still doing the Satan pentagram thing, like, it's over. That's played out. That's not evil. Like, that's
sorry, Glenn Benton. I'm very sorry.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. And it's like, you know, even if you're an atheist or somebody like, you know, a character like that, I mean, even you have to understand, you know, this is like a fad. This is the latest. That was the trend of the 80s, and it just has no context in this climate that we're in. So yeah, I'm glad to kind of see a lot of that stuff retired. Unfortunately, like the new wave of traditional heavy metal is kind of bringing that stuff back because it's an 80s sound. But a lot of that stuff I just see as a crutch. Like, metal fans don't need that. And, you know, the doom metal bands don't even embrace some of that stuff either. So even like some of the darkest stuff doesn't have to approach satanic stuff because it's just, it's not edgy. It's not cool.
Yeah, exactly. And I think even like I know black metal went through this crisis as well. I'm not too as well versed as Scar Greer is, but I think that they went through. You had the later bands sort of, well, especially bands like Ulver, that, like, you know, they sort of dropped and by the time it went to America, by the time, you know, went to the Carpathians, like it became like this folk identity rather than like we worship Satan and all this crap. Like it embraced an older folk tradition in Europe, and even in North America. Like a lot of like core black metal people, they despise American black metal, but I think like they were doing very interesting things, you know, in the Cascadians, right? Cascadian black metal. I know like Reza Negrestani wrote this academic paper on it, Cascadian black metal. But yeah, I think so. You think that metal was going like in terms of death metal? You're right. Like, where could it go? Like, I mean, the satanic panic was real, by the way, 100% real, 100% real. But in terms of like pop culture, do you think edginess died with Columbine? You probably feel like that's probably what really did it.
Yeah, honestly, because I mean, at that point, it's like whatever the caricature isn't really sexy. It's not really fulfilling. It's kind of there's that one Schopenhauer essay where he's like, you know, people who want to romanticize death, you're not going to reap the rewards of satisfaction after death. So it's kind of a futile thing to kind of I mean, obviously people talk about death in general, but like death in terms of like thinking like people who would want it in this like very, you know, strange way, that doesn't make sense, you know, philosophically. So I just think, yeah, like you said, edginess, you know, being negative something is not an identity. Being, you know, going after a boogeyman is, I don't think, fulfilling for any band. And, you know, the band is the one that has to like, they have to kind of put their money where their mouth is with their albums. And so I'm sure they're the first to get tired of a lot of these identities and say, you know what, we're not going to dump all our energy into this thing that we honestly don't know anything about, and it's not really that cool to begin with. So I think they graduated, death metal really graduated into something that is musical.
Yeah. And I think like a lot of the bands that have come out nowadays, a lot of the gent bands, a lot of the newer progressive metal bands, they took focus and they were like, this is our album. Like bands like Contortionist. Like when you know, when Cynic reformulated in the 2000s, they came out with Trace Denier, really amazing album. I really loved it. But then they came out with that other one. What was it called? Kindly Bent to Free Us. It was kind of not that great. But then Contortionist came out with Language, and that was the album that Cynic should have made. The one that came out recently after Sean Reinert's death, I think it came out a few months ago. It was a good album. I liked it. It was a good album. And of course, to give you a background in terms of visual art, is that Robert Venosa, the Miche technique painter that learned under Ernst Fuchs, that brought back the old masters, the Miche technique with oil paint. He was the one that's affiliated with what they call the visionary art people like Alex Gray. Robert Venosa, his artwork is donned on every Cynic album. And he actually, Sean Reinert and Paul Masvidal actually met Venosa, who did their Cynic album, the logo. And they were talking about it. There's this great book called, I think it's called Injustice for Art, where it talks about like metal album covers and artwork. And Robert Venosa said that he had this vision of an integral artwork that can combine sound and visuals and lyrics. And I think that was the Cynic ideal. And so that's why Venosa's artwork, so that the actual cover of the Focus album is part of a triptych that Robert Venosa did called Angelic Manifestations. And so that's where you get the sort of alien being who is also an angel. So like this is like total schizo early internet Usenet forums talking
it's
about
David
how
Icke. It's David Icke.
David Icke. Yeah. The angels in the film. Like there was this combination of like ufology with the New Agers, with the biblical end times people. So you get a thesis that the UFOs are actually the Nephilim coming to bring about the end of the world. So that, so that, like, I love this stuff. And then you have that Project Camelot, very early on in YouTube. I think they're still going. The woman's still going. Of course, she's based in Red Pilled, talking about how that certain medical thing is going to, never mind. I'm for YouTube. Of course. Yeah. But, Cynic in a way represents this change in society where you have like schizos finally having an ability to come together and be like, yes, that angels and UFOs are the Nephilim. 2012. And Theravada Buddhism, put that in the mix. Ayahuasca, let's go. Like it's and metal music, which is the ultimate Thanatos expression sonically. So, but what you said is really fascinating, Ace. You said about Schopenhauer, and of course Nietzsche gets us in Schopenhauer, the sort of like overturning of romanticism and Kierkegaard and like the Socratic lament over death and like wishing and pining for it. It's sort of like that's to them that's like a sickness almost. It's like a malady. Like what did Junior Soprano say? All this talk of morbidity, like
yeah.
But would you say that you and Thomas talked about this before we move on to the other albums? But I'm really fascinated. Would you say that the reason metal music is important because does it speak to something within, let's say, European Faustian civilization? Is it that Thanatos property, or does it have this like sort of side of it that does embrace life, that does embrace extreme? Like how would you place it, like on a more, like, I guess you'd say theory cell level?
Yeah, I think it's immediate like gratification. It's immediate stimulation. And so whereas other bands like to hint at it or have the subtlety version of it, I think with metal, it really does speak to like the male. It speaks to the American. And like you said, in the 90s when we could all watch, WWE Attitude Era and then go to the metal concert, It's like
Yeah,
we can
yeah,
be ourselves, and we don't, there is no apology tour. There is no having to justify it. It just is. It is authentic representation, or authentic expression, rather. And so that is, I think, what kind of metal allowed people to do in this kind of, that is kind of like the role of man, the way to, let out stress in a healthy way, get out that violent impulse in a healthy way. It really does kind of have all those things in one genre. And so I think that's what it does for people. I think that's,
mm,
when you see people of all types, you see valley girls, you see goth, hopefully you see goth girls more so, but you get
yeah,
all these
yeah,
different high school types that can relate to it, even though it's very masculine and it's very you would think it'd be like the meatheads genre, and it is. That's for
yeah.
agnostic front, that's for hate breed, but
Yeah, yeah.
you know, for a lot of like the philosophers, I think they can find a home in it too. That's why I got like Tyler Hamilton, who's kind of fascinated by it, because it
Oh
kind of has
yes.
that classical lineage. And that's, you hear that in Yngwie Malmsteen, you hear that in Vinnie Moore. The I forgot the name of that record company on the West Coast that does all the shredders, like Speed Metal Symphony. But but yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's what it does.
Cockney. Yeah, yeah.
So that's, I think that's what it offers to the American audience. It's kind of the ultimate
Yo,
American genre.
thank you everyone for listening to the Content Minded podcast. If you wish to support me and to unlock every full and uncensored version of each week's podcast, please go to patreon.com/GiantArtProductions. You will not only get every full and uncensored version of Content Minded, but you will also get exclusive content, such as my Giant Art Reviews series, where I analyze and pick apart various interesting and insightful books or essays. Every episode will be uploaded to Anchor, which will upload them to Spotify, as well as my backup channel on Odyssey. Please look out for new content every single week, and please look out for the Digital Archipelago with me and the Prudentialist. Thank you once again to all of my beautiful patrons. Thank you all for keeping the content renaissance alive. As I always say, God bless and goodbye.